From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, K-State's Robin Reid will join us to report on her new study of health care costs on Kansas farms and ranches. She looked at the trends in health insurance costs and medical expenses, which Robin says remain a challenge for numerous Kansas agricultural families. Also today, from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen returns, this time for a look at the legal provision called the Public Trust Doctrine and what he sees as its potential serious challenges to private property rights. Also awaiting, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That and more coming your way next on this Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Thanks for being along with us for the midweek edition of Agriculture Today. Well, as we talk about farm and ranch economics these days, one component that is gaining a greater share of attention is what we'll focus on this opening segment, health care costs on Kansas agricultural operations. That was the subject of a new analysis that our guest and others out of the Agricultural Economics Department at K-State have just pulled together. Welcoming now agricultural economist Robin Reid, K-State Research and Extension, and she'll go over the just finished summary of health care costs on Kansas farms and ranches over a 10-year horizon. Why did you undertake this analysis, Robin?
Sure, Eric. Obviously, this is a huge topic in the news right now as we near the election. Both of our candidates have different views on where health insurance should go in the future. We know the Supreme Court's going to take up the future of the Affordable Care Act the week after the election. So obviously there's a lot of concern or just awareness of what's going on right now with health care costs. So our motivation for doing this paper was we have a wealth of information from our Kansas Farm Management Association farms, a really unique data set here in Kansas. And we wanted to just study over the last 10 years, what has the health care costs done for those families, individuals, couples in that data set, and what was the trend over those 10 years.
Then, Robin, as you poured through the data, how did you break it down? You mentioned insurance costs, medical costs. You built a lot around those two.
Yeah, so just to kind of give some context, we have about 1,200 Kansas Farm Management Association farms, but we specifically looked at a set that was 168 farm families that had detailed health insurance, medical costs, net farm income, and in a lot of instances, detailed family living cost data over the last 10 years. So the first thing I did is just look at 2019. So this is the most current year available. And I broke it into singles that are under or over 65, couples that are under or over 65, and then families. And what we found is singles under 65, there's not many of them in our data set here, but they were paying an average of $11,000 in health insurance last year. And one thing to note on our singles, these are not typically young farmers. These are our singles that haven't reached Medicare age yet, so average age about 58 years. But the interesting thing in all these categories is just the range. So even in this small category, some of these singles were paying as little as $4,500 a year or up to $17,500 a year. When we move on to couples that are under 65, so they were paying on average last year $15,392 for their health insurance policy. But again, that range was anywhere from $2,600 up to almost $32,000 in an annual policy. So huge variation there. Couples that are over 65, obviously they're going to be on Medicare. They were quite a bit less at an average of $9,700 per year. But again, that ranged from anywhere from $2,000 to $30,000. So even on Medicare, there's a lot of supplemental plans and things that can add up. And then lastly, our families. This was a category of about $14,000 a year they were paying on health insurance. Again, a wide range of $1,600 up to $36,000. So a huge cost there. And one thing to note, you might have caught that the couples were actually more expensive than the families. And again, that's because just the average age on our couples in that database is 10 years more than our families. And they represent those that the kids have left the house and they're not yet Medicare age.
That was for 2019 on the insurance cost side. Did you also analyze then for medical costs incurred?
Yeah, so that's another category we looked at. Just, above and beyond their health insurance costs, what do they have in medical expenses? And this is a category, significantly less. So like our singles, we're spending about $3,000 a year, but that was anywhere from $40 to $5,700 a year. Our families and our couples under 65 spent around $5,600 a year in medical expenses above and beyond their health insurance. But again, that ranged from anywhere $300 upwards of $30,000. So quite a wide range in what's going on out there. But what we wanted to evaluate next was just those average numbers and how that's changed over the last 10 years. So just to give some context, the Affordable Care Act was passed in March of 2010, but kind of went into effect for the next few years after that, different pieces being implemented of that. In 2019 is when the tax penalty was removed for not carrying insurance. So with that backdrop, I'm just going to show a couple categories here, talk about it, but know that there's more in the paper and you want to go access that. So for our couples under 65, in 2010, they started with an average health insurance cost of $8,362. That actually increased 78.8% over the 10-year period to now where they're spending almost $15,000 a year in their health insurance costs. So again, a 79% increase over the 10 years. Their medical care costs rose some, but not near as much. So that was like a 30% increase over the 10 years. They went from about $4,000 a year to $5,200 per year in medical costs. The other one I'll highlight here is just couples over 65, so assuming they're on Medicare. They actually went a little bit higher, but not near as much as the ones that weren't. So health insurance costs increased about 23.3% for these couples that were over 65, or just about $1,900 a year that increased over 10 years.
So if you look at it collectively, and we didn't get into all of the numbers, the general trend is that over that 10-year time frame, insurance costs do go up. They go up substantially, while medical costs may be relatively stable. Is that
That's
how you break
a
it
very
out?
good summary, yeah. So just when you look at the average farm couple in our database that's under 65, they're now spending anywhere from $15,000 to $17,000 on average in health insurance, which has increased 79% in the last 10 years and now represents 25% of their overall family living expenses. The average farm family is now spending between $14,000 and $15,000 on health insurance, which is an 83% increase over the last 10 years and represents about 17% of their family living costs. And one thing that we don't really capture in here is just what kind of policy they're on, and also knowing that these policies have changed a lot in the last 10 years. So we have a lot more people now that maybe are on a higher deductible plan, but a lot more preventative care is fully covered. So there's a lot of dynamics going on behind the scenes in this too. We are shelling out more cash for health insurance, but what we're paying for has changed in its characteristics as well. But bottom line, we're paying more for health insurance, but medical costs are not significantly more than they were 10 years ago.
This is an extraordinarily important topic for all farm and ranch families out there, Robin. So how do you hope that this analysis might be used in not only identifying the importance of health costs, how it might be used moving forward in managing those costs?
Well, like I said, just bringing awareness to this. One other thing that we wanted to show is we all know that costs are going up for a lot of different things. So in the last part of this paper, we looked at just comparing how much has health insurance increased compared to overall family living costs, because we've known overall family living costs have increased as well. So when we took that step and looked at it for couples under 65, what they spent in a year in family living, health insurance used to make up 16% of that or so. That has actually increased till 25% last year. So everything they spent for family living, 25% of that was on health insurance alone, not including medical care costs. And when we looked at families, they're spending a little bit more anyway on family living. They have kids to support and things that just cost a little bit more. So their ratio was about 13% in 2010, and that has increased to 16 to 17% now in 2019. So we know all costs are going up, but there's still little that you can do really to manage this.
But it's important to recognize this as a vital component of the farm and ranch economy.
Yeah, and I guess what I would encourage is just shop around how you can and just look at different policies and how you can get some good coverage, but at a reasonable rate as well, if possible. I know that's, for some, that seems like an impossible task. One other thing we are going to be doing next year, so we are going to be collecting what type of policies these farms are on. So this is going to be an ongoing study every year that we will be looking at this more and more as we get more detailed information from our members as to how they're managing this issue.
This is an extra important piece of information for you producers to have a look at, and we'd invite you to do so at the agmanager.info website. It is a summary of health care costs on Kansas Farm Management Association farms over the years 2010 to 2019. Fine analysis, and Robin, thanks for telling us about it.
Thank you, Eric.
Agricultural economist Robin Reid, K-State Research and Extension. We'll be back with more on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today continues now, and once more we visit with a professor of agricultural law and taxation from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen, and we'll look at a legal proviso, Roger, with a long history that has recently piqued your interest. It's called the Public Trust Doctrine. It's a subject of a recent blog post of yours. Tell us what this doctrine is and its relevance to agriculture.
Well, Eric, this is a doctrine that's been around a very long time, in centuries, in fact. And originally, the seas were viewed as the common property of everyone. They weren't subject to private use and ownership. They were held in what was known as the public trust. Well, that concept later became emblazoned in English law in the Magna Carta. It became part of the common law of the individual states in the United States after the Revolution. And over the years, however, that public trust doctrine, while it was originally made applicable to seashore and what we call intertidal waters, some courts have started to expand that. And so it's that judicial expansion of the doctrine that is problematic now today, because it's resulting in the limiting and in some instances the complete elimination of what we call vested or complete fully owned property rights. And that's a big concern for agriculture, because agriculture uses, of course, land and lots of natural resources, air, water, minerals, in its production process. So if we have a legal doctrine that restricts or eliminates rights, that will materially impact ag operations and do so in a negative manner. And it also, from an economic standpoint, the expansion of the doctrine would create an economic disincentive to use that property and those resources in economically efficient manners.
So you might expand on that, how the public trust doctrine could possibly supersede property rights, which we hold dear in agriculture.
Well, property rights are based, in terms of getting where their value is, it's based on being able to exclude someone else from using the same property. For example, if I own a tract of land, that land doesn't have a whole lot of value to me unless I can exclude others from using it. Now, if they want to buy an easement from me, we can negotiate that. I'll get paid for granting an easement. So we have various carve-out rights like that, but we always do that for compensation. But it's now that public use doctrine that was originally applied to the oceans and the seas is now being expanded by the courts in what I think are very troubling manners. For instance, many endangered species have habitat on privately owned land. So if wildlife and habitat are deemed to be covered by public use doctrine, in other words, those are animals that the public can come view, they can see them, they can hunt them, they can fish for them. But if they're on private property, I should be able to exclude those. My private property rights will allow me to say, no, you cannot come on my property to hunt and fish and take pictures and view them. That's how I have value in my private property. And that's what I would call a vested right. What about vested water rights? A farming or ranching operation that has a vested water right to use water from the water course for crop irrigation or livestock watering purposes could find itself having those rights limited or eliminated if, under a public trust doctrine, a certain amount of water has to be retained in the stream for a species of fish. Now, normally, some might say, well, we have something like that. Well, yeah, we do. We have regulations based on a statute, a law that Congress has passed, and delegates the implementation of that to a regulatory body. And if those regulations impact my property, then those regulations have to be made public. There's a notice and there's a comment procedure that we go through. And there's also, if I'm negatively impacted by those rules, I can challenge them. I can go through an administrative process and then eventually end up in court and have a judge or a panel of judges adjudicate my claim as to whether I have been disaffected by that regulation. And maybe to the extent that it constitutes a taking of my property under the Fifth Amendment. If sufficient of my rights have been taken by that regulation, then I'm entitled to compensation. Well, if it's just a public trust doctrine that's expanded and said, well, that right basically existed before you had your right, the public right preempts your right, you have no way to challenge that in court. There's no administrative body to go to because there was no administrative body that enacted a rule. There's no way to judicially challenge it, and there's no way to get compensated for the loss of your right. That's really how vicious this expansion of this doctrine can be.
Now, historically, how have the courts come down on this? Have they tended to protect that just compensation due to property owners in these situations?
Historically, yes, they have. We've seen a few cracks in the wall, so to speak, in recent years, but historically the courts have said that the constitutional protection of property rights is there in the United States to protect those rights. But I will say that those that push this legal doctrine are pretty aggressive, and they're going to keep bringing these cases until they win a major case. And that's my fear. At some point, they'll be able to pick the court that they want to go to that's favorably disposed to them. Then we'll get a decision on the merits, and then other courts will follow that.
And in fact, as you describe in your blog, there was a recent case decided in the state of Nevada just this past month that makes your point quite strongly.
Yeah, it involved water rights. And, of course, the Nevada water law system is like the Kansas system for how we allocate water rights. And that's the first-in-time, first-in-right system. That's the prior appropriation system. And we've got water battles in western Kansas, and we've seen 2 or 3 cases the last 3 or 4 years, none dealing with the public trust doctrine. But we have battles over whether that is indeed the way that Kansas law reads and what's going to be enforced, when it really doesn't work well, or some party doesn't think that it works well. Well, the case in Nevada goes back over a century, and there was litigation over a river basin in California/Nevada, and this is the Nevada side of the matter, where the basin covered about 4,000 square miles. It started in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. It ended in a lake in Nevada. In 1936, there was a federal court that issued a decree that adjudicated water rights of various claimants, farmers and ranchers, to water in that basin under the prior appropriation doctrine. So this goes back a long time. You fast forward to what happened today was that you have a group that wants minimum flows remaining in that particular stream. And the appellate court in that case said that, well, you could seek minimum flows, but it depends on whether the public trust doctrine allowed the reallocation of rights that had been previously settled under the prior appropriation doctrine many, many decades ago. So the appellate court then sends two certified questions. This is the federal appellate court sending two certified questions to the Nevada Supreme Court. One was whether the public trust doctrine allowed those water rights to be reallocated. And then secondly, if doing so amounted to a taking that had to be compensated under the Constitution. So that goes to the Nevada Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, look, the legislature in Nevada had expressly prohibited water rights from being reallocated that otherwise had not been abandoned or forfeited in accordance with state water law. So, no, you can't reallocate vested rights. And thankfully, they said that. And so they didn't have to get to the second issue as to whether it constituted a taking, because they weren't going to allow the expansion of the public use doctrine to take those rights and reallocate those vested property rights away from farmers and ranchers and other water users.
But once again, that set of facts rings quite familiar to what could happen here in Kansas. And therefore, and as you put it, this can be a camel's nose under the tent for agriculture, and that you want agricultural producers and others allied with the industry to take full stock of what could happen here, Roger.
Yeah, states and federal governments can regulate natural resources. There's no question about that. The power to do so is vested in state legislatures and the Congress. But that power is limited by constitutional protections and by the voting public. But what you have here is an expansion of this doctrine that would void those constraints on a theory that a property right really doesn't exist, because it's predated by the public's right to use all that property. So if it doesn't exist, it cannot be taken. So therefore, the courts would be a super legislature that would gain authority to make public policy decisions. And we've just seen that battle in the Congress. So we're trying to seat a new judge to the Supreme Court. There's a good number of people in the Senate, senators, that believe that the Supreme Court should be a super legislature that makes public policy decisions. But that's not the way the Constitution works. That would blur the distinction between legislative bodies. The expansion of public trust doctrine would do the same thing, and it would blur the lines between the separation of powers between the judiciary and the legislative branch. So this is something it's quite esoteric, let me put it that way. It's not something that a farmer or rancher is thinking about on a daily basis. It's not in the news on a daily basis. But I'll tell you, this is something that the impact of it would be very, very important, and farmers and ranchers would be absolutely interested in the impact of it.
Well, learn more about the public trust doctrine and its relevance to agriculture from Roger's blog post. It is at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. Roger, thanks so much for your time right here.
Thank you, Eric.
Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen with us. And you're tuned to Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Now let's check on today's lead stories in agricultural news, courtesy in part of DTN. EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler announced yesterday the agency's long-awaited decision approving 3 dicamba herbicides for use over the top of dicamba-tolerant Xtend crops in 2021 and beyond. Wheeler stated the EPA has granted 5-year registrations to 2 canceled dicamba herbicides, XtendiMax and Ingenia, as well as re-registered dicamba herbicide Tavia. All 3 now require a nationwide June the 30th cutoff date for use in soybeans and a July 30th cutoff date for use in cotton, regardless of growth stage. The agency also announced it's limiting states' ability to add further restrictions to the federal labels. Now, Wheeler stated that the new label changes should address the problems with the original 2018 registrations that were cited in a federal court's opinion, which vacated 3 dicamba herbicides, XtendiMax, Ingenia, and Fexapan, back on June the 3rd. The court ruled that in that original registration decision, the EPA failed to take into account the herbicide's risk of adverse effects to the environment based on Xtend crop acreage, years of dicamba injury complaints, and overly complex labels that encouraged noncompliance. Agricultural industry and commodity groups expressed relief at the registration decision, which had left Xtend crop growers in limbo as they waited to hear if there would be legal dicamba options in the growing season 2021. Payments under the USDA's Coronavirus Food Assistance Program 2 have now reached $7.6 billion, including $3.9 billion in acreage-based payments, $2.1 billion for livestock, $844 million for sales commodities, $790 million for dairy, and $17 million for eggs and broilers. By commodity, the payments are led by $2.2 billion for corn, $1.7 billion for cattle, $832 million for soybeans, $793 million for sales commodities, $391 million for wheat, and $377 million for hogs and pigs, as well as $169 million for upland cotton. CFAP 1 payments stand at $10.3 billion. Those include $5 billion for livestock, $2.6 billion for non-specialty crops, $1.8 billion for dairy, and $802 million for specialty crops under CFAP 1. Archer Daniels Midland is arguing a Green Plains lawsuit alleging ethanol market manipulation should be transferred from a federal court in Nebraska and consolidated with other similar cases in an Illinois court. ADM argues in a recent brief filed with the U.S. District Court for the District of Nebraska that Green Plains' case is no different and belongs in the Illinois District. Omaha-based Green Plains filed a class action lawsuit back in July, alleging that ADM conducted a scheme to illegally depress the ethanol cash spot market. There are 2 other similar lawsuits filed in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of Illinois, one by Midwest Renewable Energy, the other by Swiss company AOT Holdings. Both cases there allege ethanol market manipulation by ADM. Green Plains argued in a court motion its case was different from the others, that company claiming it's the only plaintiff to have lost money on physical ethanol sales as a result of ADM's alleged scheme. ADM said in its new brief, Illinois plaintiff Midwest Renewable Energy has leveled the same accusation in its lawsuit. Green Plains and other plaintiffs have alleged that ADM has flooded the Argo terminal with ethanol to drive down the price starting in November of 2017 and accepted low-priced bids as the dominant seller rather than asking or waiting for a higher price. The Argo terminal is the daily location for ethanol trading. The 30-minute trading window at the terminal is considered crucial because it's used to set the daily Chicago benchmark price to determine the value of Chicago ethanol derivatives. The USDA Secretary was among those greeting attendees at this year's National FFA Convention and held for the first time virtually. Here's more from the USDA's Rod Bain.
A new experience for the annual National FFA Convention, a virtual affair for 2020. Among those welcoming convention participants at the opening session Tuesday, Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue.
We've become so productive. While this has brought new challenges in our abundance that need to be solved, I've got faith that we'll solve them because I have faith in you. You are that next generation of leaders in the ag industry and in America.
He noted the enthusiasm of FFA members is evident during his visits, whether in person or virtually.
I see young people like you, eager to begin careers in agriculture and proudly wearing those blue and gold jackets.
Also speaking to FFA convention goers, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos.
Your involvement with FFA encourages you to develop your academic and technical skills, and just as importantly, your character.
The National FFA Virtual Convention runs through Thursday. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And the USDA is hosting a series of webinars focused on CME specifications and live cattle and carcass grading. Scarlett Hagans tells us here these sessions are designed to provide a better understanding of the interconnected processes that support the production and marketing of high-quality U.S. beef around the world.
USDA will host a series of 4 webinars with guest speakers from 3 regional USDA cattle and carcass training centers, CME Group, and USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service. These free webinars are targeted to cattle producers, feeders, and others in the U.S. fed beef supply chain who want to better understand the reporting, delivery, and grading of feeder cattle, live cattle, and carcasses, particularly relating to CME live cattle futures. Over the course of 4 evening sessions, a wide range of topics will be covered, including CME live cattle specifications, the biological and physiological factors influencing cattle quality, the fundamentals of on-the-hoof yield and quality grading, the U.S. beef carcass standards, and the USDA carcass grading process. According to USDA Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs Greg Ibaugh, this outreach is part of a continued effort to work with cattle producers and others to ensure fair and competitive markets for the livestock, meat, and poultry industries. The sessions will be held November 17th, December 1st, December 8th, and December 15th. Each will begin at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time and will run until 8 p.m. For more information or to register for one or all the sessions, go to www.kla.org and click on Events and Meetings. I'm Scarlett Hagans.
And you're listening to Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Stop, look, and listen.
I will never see it completed. It is an ongoing process.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
I will never see it completed. It is an ongoing process. Change. Over the years, I've seen glimpses, small tokens of a process I care about, and I tried to touch on when I, as a graduate student, had to write my master's thesis. The only way I could put the effort into it was to do something from the heart. And I did. For my thesis, I researched and wrote A New Land Ethic, the conservation of the agricultural landscape. My whole study was driven by the fact that I grew up in the Netherlands as a young man and my love for land and agriculture. And I separate that word into agriculture, resulting into a cultural landscape as differentiated from the natural landscape. The cultural landscape in agriculture has ample room for the natural landscape in the Netherlands. It's exactly why I love our 430 acres in the Flint Hills. Both are imprinted on the land. How beautiful 400 acres of wheat might be it would not hold my interest except for bushels per acre and the weight per bushel and the health of the soil. But that is why I love the whole state, all of Kansas, because it provides us with both the natural and cultural landscape. The natural land tends to take care of itself. We don't plow the Flint Hills because we know we can't. Yes, I have seen good upland plowed, and now crops are growing on good grazing land, which in my eyes should never have been plowed. On our farm, there are 3 acres of land on the bottom slope of the hills, at one time plowed to grow crops. A bloody shame, because they eroded. Over the years, prairie grasses have re-established themselves. We do not graze it, but I've started to cut the prairie hay. It's good hay. The smallest field we just let be. It creates diversity with the pond, together an ideal wildlife habitat. The reason I came to think of this again is because the other day our mail woman, Marcy, drove up the hill and brought a package to the front door with the usual mail. When we opened the package, I found a book, a heavy book, and some specially Dutch treats. The Dutch treats we have already tasted. We are careful to make it last. But it is the book which really holds my interest. It's a book about landscape restoration. It touches on a small region in the Netherlands and an old stream meandering through a pleasant valley and upland heath, which is turned into farmland. The history of the land goes back earlier than the Romans, who occupied the region. Beautiful tools, bronze axes, dated 3,500 years ago, have been found. The small stream called the Beerse runs through the valley. In recent years, the stream has been straightened and the old landscape was altered. It had lost its historic value. Today, other values and functions for the region have come to the surface. A few I mention are agriculture, water management, biodiversity habitat, a gene bank for plants, cultural history of the region, education, research, and very important, recreation. It is the people enjoying and learning about the natural and cultural agricultural history of the land where they live. In the Netherlands, in this case, many organizations work together with the local people, and that is the key to success. Too often, from higher up, it is ordered, and the people who live in the region have little to say. But we are learning. It cannot be done successfully without the scientific knowledge. Not one man or woman knows it all, but teaming up is the way to go. So far, I'm only in the beginning of this study book. Very informative, written with tremendous love of the land. The photos make statements. Of course, as I read it, I'm thinking of Kansas. And as I think, I see our state in my mind. It's funny, we always go from east to west. That's how it always has been. We have the densely populated areas to the east. In Kansas and the United States of America, everything is of a different scale. It's all so much bigger. But man is the same. What I said in the beginning is that I believe in time we will value land for more than production. We will look at land, all land, for its natural and cultural value, especially in the densely populated areas. In the future, we will make land use decisions. We will care for the land and people. John Wolfgang von Goethe once said, "To see nature, one has to walk." That is the scale we need near our densely populated regions.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That'll do it for our Wednesday edition. Looking ahead to tomorrow's broadcast, we'll learn how important mobile devices have become in implementing precision agriculture practices on our farms and ranches. K-State agricultural economist Terry Griffin has just wrapped up a new analysis on that, and he'll report on it, along with much more, on tomorrow's edition. We hope you'll rejoin us then. Meantime, be sure to check out our podcast service, where you can have our broadcast automatically downloaded to your mobile device every weekday. All the details are at agtoday.net, agtoday.net. Look into that. Eric Atkinson here, bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.